The winter wind howled through the broken windows of the old orphanage, rattling the glass like fragile bones. Snow piled up against the walls, burying the edges of the forgotten building under a thick white blanket. Inside, 5 children huddled together under a worn-out quilt, their breath visible in the freezing air, eyes fixed on the flickering flame of a dying candle. They didn't speak much. They had learned that silence saved energy, but their hearts throbbed with the ache of a holiday they had never truly celebrated. Christmas, to them, was a word whispered through cracked walls, stories heard in passing, laughter from beyond gates they could never cross. Yet, this year, something would be different. Something, or someone, was about to step into their lives, not with gifts wrapped in shiny paper, but with something far more powerful: love, loss, and a second chance at family. Backhand index pointing right. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the magic of human connection, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Rapple of Hope. Let's spread these powerful stories together and touch lives around the world. The story begins in a sleepy little town blanketed in snow and silence, a place where December nights fell early and the darkness lingered like an unwelcome guest. At the edge of town stood St. Alora's Home for Children, a place that once bustled with warmth and community, but now stood neglected, with only 5 children and one exhausted caregiver trying to keep it alive. The caregiver, Miss Ellen, was gentle and kind but worn thin from years of underfunding, government indifference, and the crushing weight of loneliness. The children, Milo, Ava, Sammy, Lily, and the youngest, little Ben, had all been left behind by the world in different ways, and yet, they clung to each other like pieces of a broken ship trying to stay afloat. Their Christmases were usually just another day, another bowl of watery soup, another night staring at the ceiling while the rest of the world glittered with joy and light. But this year, Milo, the oldest at just 12, had a wild idea. He had overheard 2 townsfolk talking outside the grocery store, about an old man who lived alone at the end of Hazelwood Street. They spoke about him in hushed tones, calling him the Hermit or the Ghost of Christmas Past. Some said he used to be a wealthy clockmaker, others believed he lost his entire family in a fire. Nobody really knew the truth. But one thing was certain: he was alone, utterly and completely, just like them. With nothing to lose and a heart full of naive hope, Milo convinced the others they should invite the old man for Christmas dinner, not that they had much to offer, just a few potatoes, a half loaf of stale bread, and their company. They wrote a letter, shaky handwriting and all, sealed it in a crumpled envelope, and walked through the snow barefoot just to slip it under his door. They didn't expect him to reply. They didn't even expect him to read it. But on Christmas Eve, as the snow began to fall heavier, they heard a knock on the orphanage door. He was tall and gaunt, his coat too big for his thin frame, his beard white but unkempt. His eyes, however, told stories. Deep, stormy blue, filled with grief and time. He didn't smile, nor did he frown. He simply looked at the children, letter in hand, and said, "I got your invitation." What followed was a quiet, tentative meal shared around a rickety table. The children offered him their best: a cup of warm water steeped with a cinnamon stick they'd found in the pantry, 2 boiled potatoes cut into tiny pieces, and the last apple they'd saved for something special. He accepted it all without a word of complaint, chewing slowly, listening to their laughter, their games, their small dreams spoken aloud like shooting stars. For hours, he simply sat and watched, until Lily, the smallest girl with freckles like snowflakes, gently climbed into his lap and said, "You look like you need a family too." That night, something shifted. The children didn't know his name yet, but they had already started calling him Grandpa Snow, because he came with the snowfall and melted something cold inside their home. In the days that followed, the man, whose name they eventually learned was Henry Whitmore, began returning. First with warm blankets he dug out of his attic, then with canned goods, and later with stories from a life he never thought he'd share again. A watchmaker once, yes, and a father too. His daughter, wife, and little grandson had died in a car crash on their way to surprise him for Christmas 5 years ago. Since then, he had locked himself away, convinced that joy was something he no longer deserved. But the laughter of those 5 children, their stubborn kindness, and their acceptance cracked the walls he'd built so high. He began repairing the broken things in the orphanage, first the heater, then the old grandfather clock, and finally the leaky roof. With each repair, he seemed to repair a piece of himself too. One stormy evening in January, Miss Ellen collapsed. The children panicked, unsure what to do, until Henry took charge, lifting her gently into his arms and rushing her to the hospital. That night, as snow battered the windows, Henry sat with them in the hospital lobby, holding their hands and promising he wouldn't let anything happen to her, or them. And he didn't. Miss Ellen recovered slowly, but Henry stepped up, visiting city offices, meeting with child services, pouring everything he had into making St. Alora's a safe haven again. In spring, something miraculous happened. With the help of a local journalist moved by the story, a fundraiser was launched to restore the orphanage. Donations poured in, and volunteers arrived. Henry was nominated for a Community Hero Award, and in the small ceremony that followed, he stood on stage, the 5 children clinging to him, and said with tears in his eyes, "They saved me before I ever saved them." By the next Christmas, St. Alora's was no longer a forgotten building, it was a home. Its windows glowed warmly at night, its halls echoed with singing and stories, and its walls bore the laughter of children who had once thought they'd been abandoned by the world. And at the heart of it all was Henry, Grandpa Snow, who found a second family when he least expected it.